Kristen Jenson, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Sathiya, for having me on.
It's really good to have you here. You have an incredible organization, a movement that's very near and dear to my heart. And so we're going to get into all of it, but I know there's a story behind why this work of yours exists. Tell me why you're so interested in protecting and defending young minds.
Several years ago, I got a call from a friend, a new friend. We'd moved into a new town and I'd met her really at church, and she called me and she told me this really sad story. We stayed up till like 1:30 in the morning talking, and it was about her 17-year-old son who had gotten involved in, well, acting out sexually on his younger brothers and sisters, and porn was definitely involved.
Hmm.
And so she told me this really sad story, and I woke up the next morning and I just had this thought keep coming to my mind in a very persistent way. Who will warn the young children about pornography? And I thought, okay, well, there's probably 37 books, already. I mean, I knew about this problem because I had a friend who was a psychologist who tried to help people with porn addictions. So I knew that it was a problem out there, but I hadn't ever thought about children getting involved and also getting hurt by it and then hurting other children. So I thought, okay, we got to nip this in the bud. We got to start talking to kids. I'm sure there's a book out there. I just went to look for a book to give to her because she had a lot of children. And I thought, she'll need a book like this.
Sure.
But I couldn't find anything. So then I thought, I started doing some research, and I just had this crazy idea that I could write a children's book about pornography, and with the goal of helping parents begin this discussion earlier when they could do the most good, rather than waiting till they saw a problem. To be preventative, right? To have a defense, to give their kids a defense against pornography while they were still young, because young kids are seeing it. That was the idea. I just decided I'm kind of a person that jumps in and then sees if I can swim. It's kind of how I roll.
Love it.
And so I did. I jumped in. I started writing this book, and I had other like author friends that were like, you need to set up a blog, you need to start writing about this. So I started that. I just began this journey, and it took 3 years to get the book finished and illustrated and published. And that was almost over 10 years ago. And we've updated it, and it just seems to fill a niche to helping parents begin this conversation in a really easy, comfortable, non-shaming, just gentle facts about something that they're going to have to, make a decision about, right?
Definitely. So, and you left out the part that it became a #1 bestseller on Amazon. It continues to perform very, very well. So,
I was hoping you would say that, Sathiya. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's better coming from the host for sure. But the book has done really well for that reason. Like you definitely have met a need. You mentioned you launched the first version 10 years ago. I didn't realize it was that long.
I know, 2014, and so it's coming up on 11 in March.
Wow. And then you started writing it in 2011 then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So, well, then my first question after all this is, how has the climate around pornography changed from when you first wrote this book and were doing research, which would have been even earlier, early smartphone days, that sort of thing, to now, we're recording this early 2025. What are some major changes you've witnessed on the conversation with kids?
Well, I would say that it's much easier to engage people in this conversation. Recently the New York Times came out with a piece, we've got to start talking to our kids about porn. Like, yeah, and that's about 10 years too late. I mean, what I'm saying is, yeah, it's definitely about time. So I'm glad the New York Times is saying that. And I know the Wall Street Journal has also written pieces. So I think that it's more, and when I go to conferences, I notice parents are much more like wanting this information. They understand the need, where I used to have to explain it.
Yeah.
And now I don't have to explain it as much
Yeah,
to
you probably used to
people.
get like the, oh, not my kid. My kid would never, or that kind
Yeah,
of thing.
yeah, I don't get that as much. What happens is a parent will have an older child and they'll get into it, unfortunately. And then the other younger children, often the parent will then find us. I wish the parent would find us earlier for that first kid, right? But often they're coming after they've had a really sad experience. So, but we're here to be preventative. We're here to be encouraging. We're here to give you the information and the tools so that you can, give these this defense to your child. So when they see pornography and they are exposed, they are not caught off guard.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I don't know about you, Sathiya, but I'm terrible. When I'm caught off guard, forget it. I don't do well at all. It's always like, 2 hours later, oh, I wish I would have said that, or oh, I wish I would have done that. Right.
Yeah.
So we're not very good when we're caught off guard, most of us, and neither are our children. They
Yeah.
need a heads up. Yeah.
Yeah, I think especially when we're talking about pornography, right? You can get caught off guard with something else, but most things aren't as stimulating or as addictive or as toxic as porn. So I think it's a big deal for you to put a resource in the hands of parents so that they can be prepared and they can, more importantly, prepare their children. So I think it's really, really good. You mentioned, well, there's so many things I want to ask, but I guess the one thing is, you mentioned just talking to parents. You're going around, you're speaking, parents are asking you questions, and I'm just wondering if parents are more aware now. What do you find what are the main points that you are driving home these days when it comes to preventing kids from getting exposed to pornography or helping them if they are exposed? What are some of the main things that parents need to hear and that you're trying to drive home?
Sooner is safer. As soon as your child, people ask, well, how old should my child be when I start these conversations? I'm like, well, how old is your child when they have access to the internet? Any access. We're talking video games, we're talking anything. They go to grandma's house, right? Like any access at all to the internet. Do they go play with their cousins or their friends who may have been given, phones, heaven forbid. And so any access to the internet. And that's why I actually wrote the book for the junior book. So Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior is for 3-year-olds. And I have now, didn't 10 years ago, but I now have some grandsons, some very young grandsons. And I love them. And it has even become more real for me because of my grandsons. And I look at them and their innocence, and I want to do everything I can to protect them. And so we have read them, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior, and the 6-year-old, we're about to start reading the older book too. So I think, so first of all, sooner is safer. That's the first thing. And then continue the conversation, because this is not a one and done. There's just no checking the box. You have to begin the conversation, yes, but it's a constant. And especially as they get older and into those middle school years, they need to make a decision, and they need to reject pornography, to keep it out of their beautiful, precious brains, and to know what to do when they see it. So I would say those two things for sure are things that and I would say that there's a third thing. Definitely keep yourself educated.
Yeah.
So we have a saying at Defend Young Minds, and that is, get the facts, arm the kids, continue the conversation. So those three things, and put it on repeat, right? So that's what we do with our website, Defend Young Minds, our newsletter, and our social media outreach, is to keep, drip, 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 keep feeding parents and professionals out there the information they need, and then to provide the tools that will be helpful, like our books and our courses. So all of those is to help give kids a defense.
Yeah.
They don't have a defense against pornography unless you give them a defense against it. They're going to be taken by, and their natural biological wiring is unfortunately going to get the better of them because they're naturally curious. So we have to do everything we can to prepare them.
Yeah, and you're talking to an audience of people who were unfortunately enravished by, the intrigue of
Yes.
pornography and the excitement of it, and eventually falling prey to it as an addiction that has, caused some major damage in a lot of situations. And myself, I'm an example of that as well. And I do believe I always say tongue in cheek, I hope my coaching practice doesn't exist one day, because I think it'd be amazing to have another generation come up that doesn't struggle with it. And that is the key
Yes.
is, for a lot of
Yeah.
people who are in their adult years, it's a much more reactive, and we're trying to reverse the effects of pornography. But I kind of see your work as a lot more front lines on the kind of preemptive or proactive approach. If we really do want to change the narrative, it's going to be because the next generation and the generations to come have a different narrative. They are equipped, like you said, with tools and with weapons to fight the effects of pornography. And I think that's why what you're doing is so important. Talk to me about the book. So Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, that was the main book that you released in 2014. You've done, I think, a second edition of that one, and then Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior. Can you give us roughly, if we were following the prototypical journey, when would you start with your kid with the junior version? And then I think you said around 6 is where that transition happened with your grandson. Is that typical? Like what, just talk us through kind of the process of how to make the most of the
Sure.
resources.
Yeah. So first thing I would do would be go to our website, defendyoungminds.com, and download our free guide, which is how to talk to kids about pornography. It's a quick start guide, and it will get you up and running on some facts and some great tips. But then, yes, definitely look at the books. And they're in many libraries. I'm not sure about Canada, but I know they are in the United States. But you can also find them on Amazon. The junior book is a very simple, gentle, fun book. There are hidden cameras, that they can look for. And I would say start this book at around age 3. So I've heard people start at age 2. We did actually start at age 2.5 or so. Now they're not going to get everything, but it just becomes normalized. This is something we talk about. We're going to read this book, on a regular basis. And that book gives them a definition. So a very simple age appropriate definition of bad pictures. And we do talk in terms of good and bad. Children are black and white. Children don't get nuances. So for parents that like to be nuanced, hey, that's great. That'll work when they're 10, 11, 12, and older. But, a 3-year-old cannot be nuanced. It's just the brain just isn't there.
Yeah.
So it's just very simple. There are some pictures that are good for you, and there are some pictures that are bad for you. And so these are bad pictures. It's a simple definition. And then we give them, we talk about how, bad pictures are like picture poison. And you don't want to ingest poison, and you don't want to bring poison into your mind, into your brain. And then we give them a plan. And in the junior book, it's the turn, run, and tell plan. And we have them practice motions and various things. In that book, we also have little conversation cards, or they look like sticky notes that are, pasted inside the book. And so there's lots of prompts for conversations. And so that's for 3 to about 6, 7, even 8, depending on the maturity of the child. And then somewhere around 7, I would say, a little younger, a little older, depending on, like, I have a mom reach out to me, and she said she bought Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. It came, she took it out of the package, put it on the coffee table, leafed through it, and then she had to go do something else. Her 6-year-old son picked it up. Now, this kid was obviously a little above the curve. He read the book. He sat down and read the book, and he came in, he said, "Hey, Mom, that's a good book."
Oh,
At 6. And I'm like, okay. Now, most 6-year-olds are not going to be able to do that, but I'm just saying that depending on your child. So the older book, the kid will give, again, a definition, a warning, and a plan. Those are 3 things every kid needs and deserves.
Definition, warning, plan.
A
Yep.
definition, a warning, and a plan. And this is a age-appropriate definition again. What are bad pictures? Pictures that show the private parts of the body that we keep covered with a swimsuit, but that focus on them. Like, I don't believe, and some will disagree with me, but I don't believe that all nudity is sexualized. Some nudity, like you can see a picture of the David, like I don't think that's turning anyone on.
Right.
I could be wrong. So I feel like you need to like talk about the purpose of the nudity, right?
Yeah.
The intention is to arouse, right? The intention is to get these thoughts. So in the book for older kids, we talk about a definition, but we get into how it can make you feel, right? And how it can create that curiosity and why we need to not follow that curiosity, but learn about addiction. So we talk about addiction. We talk about the thinking brain and the feeling brain and how those two brains work together. Again, this is super simple, but I've had, neurosurgeon, specialists in neurology, neurosurgeons and people that are very smart, sign off on this. So it's a very simple concept. And then we talk, so a child understands addiction. Now, what child living in this age should not know about addiction of any, and it's the same, it's the same pathway. Porn addiction, you're just getting the drug through your eyes, maybe through your ears, through, reading, even. So it's the same pathway for all addictions. And I think we're doing our kids such a service to give them, to shore them up against all addictions, to substances, behaviors. And then again, we give them a plan. So the warning is, hey, this can become an addiction. We also talk a little bit about objectification and how pornography teaches you to treat others in an unkind and disrespectful manner. But then we give them the plan. And this plan is a little more involved. It's a 5-step plan. It's called the can-do plan. And it teaches kids the 3 things they need to do right off the bat when they see it. And then the 2 things they need to do once those pictures, continue to pop up in their mind. How can they minimize that power? So again, the older version does give a definition, a warning, and a plan, but definitely much more involved and definitely more about addiction and the neuroscience of addiction.
I did read through it, and I can definitely confirm the neuroscience is solid and really good for, I think, that age group. And we've learned a lot on the podcast over the years, just talking. I'm a very new parent. My son is 14 months, going on 15 months, and my wife and I have had tons of conversations trying to make sure that we do this thing well. And I've been fortunate to interview people on the podcast and learn as well. And a lot of what you're saying, I think, would line up with what we've heard previously, just the importance of this is not a one and done. It's an ongoing conversation. And even the book is, if I'm hearing you right, the book is meant to kind of provide the information, give them a bit of an action plan. I love the acronyms. And then really, if I'm hearing it correctly, it's meant to be kind of a catalyst for ongoing conversations and more meaningful interaction that continues around this sort of subject matter, which I would think is like a huge value add for a parent. It's not just that they get to say, don't look at these pictures, they're bad. It's that they get to have kind of another part of the relationship that maybe would have been closed off had the parent not took some initiative. And that part gets to be opened up now as well, so that as the child continues to develop sexually, as they have more questions, they get into more complicated and romantic relationships. There's a conversation history that's built up there. Mom is safe or dad is safe to talk about these things. At least they've demonstrated that so far. Therefore, I can continue to have the conversation. And I have to imagine that's the real long-term value out of the books.
Absolutely. I think that, and in the junior book, we have these little conversation prompts, and we also have let's talk questions at the end of each chapter in the book, as you saw. So they have questions that the kids can write the answers out to, or you can just use them as, conversation prompts. So yes, those conversations are the things, and the fact that you're a safe person. I've heard people say, "Oh, you know, you should talk to kids when they come to you and tell you they've seen it." Like, well, you're going to be waiting a long time, unless your kid is really exceptional. If you don't start the conversation, so parents need to start this. Sathiya, there are many studies where they are looking at what they call, and I don't really love this name, the naivete gap. But what they do is they say, okay, parents, what do you think your kids have been involved in online? And then they
Right.
ask their own kids, the kids themselves, what have you been involved? And how much porn have you seen? And they've done several of these studies. And there's a huge gap, double the amount of, so 25% of parents say, yeah, I think my kids have seen porn. And it's more like, 60%. So really, you just have to know that most parents are not aware. And I'll tell you why. It's this bubble we all live in, right? So in social media, we're all in this bubble. And, well, I'm not seeing that on my social media feed. Well, I'm not seeing that in my world. Well, you don't know the world that your kid really is living in unless you really talk to them on a regular basis and open these conversations. And it's not as hard as you think. Once you get going, it becomes normalized and natural.
So I wanted to ask you about that. Is there a way that a parent could botch this? Like if you read through the book and you're clearly uncomfortable, does the kid pick up on that and then it's not really a great experience? Or like, I guess what I'm asking is, it would be easy to just say, oh, perfect, I'll just buy the book and read it to my kid, and you kind of dust off your hands. And I know that's not what you're saying, but are there things that a parent can do just to ensure that this is really a valuable experience and a net positive for them and for their child?
Yes. So first of all, you can stop worrying that you're going to botch it up, because if you begin these conversations, and especially if you don't just do it once, right? Because doing it once, they're going to have questions. So it needs to be ongoing. You need to keep having these conversations and assuring them that you want to talk to them about it. I just don't think, even if you're uncomfortable, these books, everyone says if you go on Amazon, you read all the thousands of reviews, which I know you're not going to, but there's thousands of reviews, and if AI now does like a little summary, right? Mm-hmm. And the summary often mentions how comfortable the books are to read to kids, and they are just the launching point. But you can reread. How many kids want books reread to them? Yeah. And I have heard many kids say, parents will come, this is their favorite book. And I'm like, okay, I didn't see that coming, but because kids like to learn about their brain. They like to learn things. So, and they love looking for the little cameras in the junior version. So it's fun. I would say the mistakes that a parent could make would be to only have one conversation and then check it off. Yeah. That would be a mistake. I would say another mistake would be if they find out that their child has viewed porn, because I have had many parents come to me and say, I read this book to my son or daughter and I found out that they had already seen it. Right. To react in a, freak out way. You don't want to freak out. You don't want to and you don't want to just take away privileges right away. You have to think it through. Yeah. So when you find out, thank them for telling you, and then you can take time to think about a response and what you're going to do about it. And because if you say, you're never going to play with that kid again, the kid that showed you porn, like, you're never going to, I'm going to take away everything. That's their biggest nightmare. And you got to think through this. So that's another mistake I would say a parent could make is to react without thinking. Yeah. So we have my permission to delay. Delay is the way. Right. To delay your response. Even if you catch your kid and they didn't come to you, right? You catch them. You find out that they have been looking at this. We have a whole guide on that on Defend Young Minds, which you can download, which is My kids saw porn, now what? It's a smart plan guide, and it takes you through 5 steps and tons of great articles by therapists and others that help you know exactly what to do when you find out that your child has seen pornography. There's some great advice to how to handle that, but to react in a shaming or kids don't like to see their parents freaked out. It's uncomfortable. They don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to deal with it. And they certainly don't want to repeat it. I guess unless they're trying to get attention, that could be a whole nother thing. But so I would say those are the things that I would watch out for. But even if you feel uncomfortable, read the book aloud yourself. Read it with a friend, read it with a spouse. But you don't have to feel completely 100% comfortable to get that started. Make a date and say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do it. And if I could just tell one story, and this is one of my favorite stories. A mom wrote on Facebook that she had read Good Pictures, Bad Pictures to her 9-year-old son. He went to school. 3 days later, another child who had a smartphone, which is really sad, came up to him on the playground and said, hey, I want to show you something, and put it in his face. And guess what? It was porn. And this child, though, knew what it was because he could recognize it. He knew what it was. He knew it was dangerous for him, and he knew exactly what to do. And he did it. And he went home and he told his mom, I was scared, but I knew what to do.
Wow.
I was scared, but I knew what to do. What a gift. How, we want to take this burden off of their shoulders.
Yeah.
And so you can do that for your child and for your children. You can give them what you probably didn't have, right? Most of the people that are listening to this did not have a parent that talked to them and warned them about pornography. Sathiya, there's so many people that have, especially men, but women too, that have come up to me and said, I wish my parents had had your book. And the sadness in their eyes and the pain, I think we can do better. I know we can do better.
Yeah, I literally had that thought as you're talking, just thinking, wow, what a gift that would have been to know what to do when I did get first exposed to pornography. Very similar situation of just, a peer kind of sticking it in my face. So that's really powerful. What would you say to the person who's like, okay, I don't want my kids to watch because I have been exposed to pornography. I've been watching it. It's been negatively affecting my life, but I still have not figured that out myself. So am I really the right person to be reading this book? Do I have a say? What if they ask me more about it and somehow I get trapped in a conversation about my own experience and I'm not ready for it? I can just imagine some of those, I guess, objections you might get from somebody who is not still fully healed from their own struggle with porn. How does that play into them guiding their kids?
That is such a great question. And we have written about this on Defend Young Minds. The best advice that I have found out there is that you don't have to be completely healed from your own issues to talk to your kids. None of us are perfect. And we all say, we all teach our kids things that we're still not perfect at, right? I've taught my kids to be kind. Have I always been 100% kind? No. So just give yourself some grace there. Don't worry about it. We're not expected. Progress, not perfection, right? We are on the road, but we are not perfect in any way, shape, or form. Don't expect that from you. And don't let that be like a barrier. I've heard from lots of parents and actually, one therapist told me she worked with men who were really working to free themselves from this addiction. And she would offer them the book to use so that they could talk to their own kids. Say, this is what daddy is struggling with, or this is what mommy is struggling with, whatever.
Oh, wow.
And, this is, and so when you win, you want to talk, because your kids know more and they feel more. They
Definitely.
sense more than you think they do, than they know. And you will find that out when your kid is 25 and tells you all the things that they
Oh
knew
man.
and that they
Yeah.
did without your knowledge, right? Like, you
Yeah.
will find that out, which I have found that out as, when my kids have gotten older. But so what I would just say is, you don't have to be ready to like fess up to your kids to read them this. You just have to be ready to want to give them what you didn't have, right?
Yeah.
A defense. And because you can't, it's like trying to play the stock market. Like, it's very difficult to guess when things are going to go up and when things are going to go down. And you just don't know when your kid is going to be exposed.
Yeah.
And not only that, I don't know, Sathiya, if you want to go here, but warning kids about pornography at a young age helps them to be more protected against abuse, against sexual
Mm.
abuse,
Yeah.
not only from other children, but from adult perpetrators.
Yeah,
Um, be,
I do want to go there. I
yeah,
wanted to just ask one thing really quick, or maybe just mention something that's important is the power of sharing your own story, I think can go a long way for parents. That's one thing I was thinking, like when I was thinking about my son's Judah, Judah's 14 months, and in let's say a year and a half from now, my wife and I are ready to read the junior version of this book to him. I'm just thinking, man, it will actually be really interesting for me to share my own story. Maybe not the first time, but I can just envision at some point this book is naturally going to lead to me sharing my story about my first exposure, how it affected me,
yeah,
and it's actually such a great way to solidify the messaging of the book. And even if it does in later years, I mean, granted, my struggle is incredibly public. There's no hiding that from my kids. But I think even that alone also it's great for the relatability piece. I think it shows that, hey, you don't have to be like, we're not expecting, like you said, it's progress over perfection. And I think sometimes if parents present a standard and then they don't mention any part, or there's no wiggle room to fall short of the standard, it can actually put a lot of
mhm,
pressure on kids, and it can enforce a lot more shame when they do fall short, because obviously nobody's perfect. And so I think
mhm,
even parents sharing their story can really de-shame the experience, and
mhm.
further some of the things we're talking about, like having these conversations, being a place of safety, playing a long game. So just to encourage parents out there, if you feel like, man, I'm really falling short and I don't have this area figured out, I think that can be really encouraging for your kids if it's framed the right way, and if you use something like these books to be kind of the springboard into those conversations. I
Mhm.
think that could be really powerful.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Kids are being more prone to abuse, a lot of phishing schemes, sexploitation happening online. And I know you were alluding to that. Please carry on, because I think this is a very important conversation. And again, if we're talking about the naivety gap or the misinformation gap amongst parents, I think again, this is where you're going to get a lot of the "my kid would never," and that only happens in those seedy chat rooms online, and that's obviously not the case.
We used to live in a world, and when the online world started, and the internet got going, and then we got iPhones and iPads and, the streaming services and full color and all the stuff, right? When we first got started, I think it wasn't such, people said it was a Wild West, but it's still a Wild West out there.
Yeah.
It's still it's gotten more dangerous as people have learned to use the internet, the AI tools to find kids that are vulnerable,
Hmm.
and to know where they are. And so a couple things. When I say that children who know how to reject pornography and to report it, to recognize and report seeing it, are safer than kids that have never been, given a heads up. I have a story. I have many stories, but I'll tell you one, because I've had people come up and say, "Your book saved my grandson from sexual abuse."
Hmm.
And when that first started happening, even I was just like, "Oh, really? Like, oh." But then I started to look into it. I'm like, of course, because what is the number one grooming tool for child sexual predators? And that is porn. right? It's so easy. It normalizes sexual abuse of children. It shows them what they're expected to do, and desensitizes them. So, of course, they're going to use that. So, when mom contacted me and told me the story of how they went to a friend's house for dinner, and just seems like a very safe thing. Well, the friend was doing some renovations, and so they put all the children's toys downstairs in the basement right next to the staircase. And so the kids were told, run down, pick up a toy, and bring it back up to play with. Well, this one kid was down there, 6 years old. He's looking around and trying to, I could just imagine, which toy, And he's approached by a man who shows him gay porn on his phone and starts talking to him and saying how fun this would be to do and da 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 da. And turns out he was renting the basement. Of course, the family didn't know that they were renting the basement to, a child sexual predator. But they, so that boy recognized it. He knew, which is what we say in the book, no one should ever show a child pornography. He knew it was wrong. He ran upstairs and he got himself out of a very dangerous situation. We don't want to put all the responsibility on a kid for protecting themselves, right, from predators. But there are just some situations, and it can happen so quickly. We don't know. We don't know all the situations they'll be with. We don't know the trustworthiness of every single teacher or coach or, person that they will meet. Mm-hmm. So they do need to have some guidance. And one of the things is to recognize and reject pornography and know what to do when they see it. Mm-hmm. Will keep them safer in those situations. And I have many other stories about this. But hopefully that will also help you, motivate you to begin the process. And there's other books that we recommend for child, like body safety books that are wonderful and that will give you even more information. But if you do this one thing, they're definitely going to be safer.
Yeah, and I mean, sexual abuse can destroy a child's life. It is a life-altering experience, and this is in the grand scheme of things, the amount of courage it takes to get a book, for example, and read this book through with your kids and just warn them is so much smaller than the amount of time, effort, energy, healing, and repair that used to happen if your kid ever did experience any kind of sexual abuse. So I'm glad you shared that story. And look, we have clients, these are grown men who are getting duped online, thinking they're having emotional affairs when really they're talking to a bot. Or, it's more a bot now. Sometimes before it was, you're not talking to the person you think you're talking to. And then, you have other platforms where it's they think they're interacting with the creator, but it's all just, it's all automated and AI and whatnot. Yeah. And if grown men with fully formed brains, or hopefully mostly formed brains, are falling prey to this, you can just imagine what a child is susceptible to without that maturity and development. So I think that's a really big deal. The whole predator thing, the kind of sexual development thing, is the book kind of, I guess, preventative or preemptive enough that if a kid found themselves in any kind of situation like that, they should know what to do? Does it connect the dots even if pornography isn't involved?
We do know that pornography is fueling this huge upward trend of child-on-child sexual problem sexual behavior. Yeah. So we do know that is happening. And I was at a conference last summer back in DC, a very prestigious conference on preventing child abuse. And not a lot was said from the pulpit, but when I talk to people in private, they're all like, oh yeah, porn's driving this. Yeah, porn's a terrible thing. Porn is driving this.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was interesting that everybody behind the scenes was willing to admit that to me. I think people know that a lot of people use porn and they don't want to offend them, or they don't want to come off as sex negative, We all want to be sex positive, and somehow porn is totally sex negative. Right. It's not sex positive. I don't know. I'm screaming this from the rooftops. I
Yeah,
think it's
us
very
too.
clear. It's very clear. And it makes a lot of sense to see those connections. Um, but I'm, at certain conferences, they do talk about this, and then others, they don't want to talk about it. So
Yeah.
I try to go to all of them, be a voice crying in the wilderness sometimes. But
Yeah, sure.
for example, I was at a conference I was invited to speak at a conference for like preschool teachers, early education. And a woman came to our class because we were talking about Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior. And we actually have a play guide that goes along with it that you can download for free. And so we were talking about the play guide and how they could use this in their, in their classes. This woman came in early to my second class and she said, I wanted to make sure I got a seat. First of all, when I first saw that you were going to be here, I was shocked. Like, why would you be talking about porn for early, And she goes, but then I had this horrifying experience where they had, and so it was someone close to her in her family probably, or a close friend, had a 3-year-old that they was taking, like this 3-year-old was videoing herself with some kind of device, taking her clothes off and kind of doing sexual things.
Wow.
And they're like, that's really odd. And then they found a video of her trying to have sex with the family pet. Okay. And they thought, okay, she's being groomed. There's some adult involved. They got the police involved. They got the FBI, I think, involved. I mean, they really tried to figure out like who is trying to get after this kid. And they could not find anyone. And when they really looked at it, the conclusion was she's been groomed by porn. She had some access and found it and was then imitating it. And not only imitating it, but videoing herself, recording herself.
Yeah.
And that's just,
Wow.
that was just like, that is sickening. Like, that is just sickening when you think, like, you're a young child. Like, I think of but I've talked to that with somebody, and he basically didn't believe me. He said, no, that there was a groomer involved. There was a hands-on groomer. I'm like, that used to be, that was it, right?
Yeah.
If a kid was acting out sexually, the kid always had a hands-on groomer. But we have had so many stories of adults coming and saying, look, I started acting out sexually on my cousins because of porn.
Yeah.
And I had no hands-on predator. Yeah. I was acting out because of porn. So, some people are not going to believe it. They're just trapped in their own way of thinking, and they're not going to actually see the facts.
It's funny that people would refute that when, like, we know kids just follow what they see. I mean, I literally, my 15-month-old the other day, he sees me weigh my food every morning. I'm working with a personal trainer. I literally weigh all my food, and he loves the scale because he can push the buttons and there's a little reading. So he just, anything like tech like that, he loves. So he literally took my scale the other day and then took a banana and put it on top. Like he's just seen me do it 100 times, so he's doing it now, right? Like I think
Of course,
that's how kids learn. So it's funny that people would refute it, but again, like you said, there's people that they have their own struggle with it. There's obviously, we know there's ulterior motives and some other agendas out there as well. So that's really quite interesting.
Yeah, kids are imitative, and they have a wealth of specialized neural cells called mirror neurons that help them imitate what they see adults do.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, there's no protective neurons in there saying, oh, but actually in the case of pornography, don't do that, right? No, they see those things. They imitate what they see adults do. That's how they're supposed to be growing up. That's how they learn to become an adult. Unfortunately, if they get exposed to pornography, they're still thinking about imitating it. Their brain is still, and I'm not saying that every kid that sees pornography is going to imitate it on a younger child, but I was at a conference for this very problem. Children who offend on other children sexually, right? There's a conference for that, right? There's a conference for everything. So I was there, and it was interesting because somebody had written a book about a child that had, offended on another child, and that they were basically advocating for an intervention to help these kids, which I totally am on board for, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of these kids, if they get help, if they go through a program, they don't turn into pedophiles. Okay. I think what turns a lot of people into pedophiles is porn. But, in the book, the reason this kid started offending was because he saw pornography, right? And, I'm like, there it is,
Yeah.
right there. Even these experts that are writing this book that are to be used by therapists actually know that this is what's happening,
Yeah.
and that kids are getting, groomed by porn itself to become, I hate to say perpetrators, didn't put that with a child, but, unfortunately, and we could be here for hours talking about all the examples I have of this happening.
Yeah.
But we've been hearing about this since 2016. I'm sure it was happening well before that.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned how the sexual abuse just is so life altering. I was on a plane to Washington D.C. For a summit on this problem, child on child harmful sexual behavior, and the military was coming because they have a huge problem on military bases with this.
Yeah. Yep.
And so they were coming. There's all these people were coming to the summit. We were helping to sponsor the summit. I was on the plane, and so chatting with this guy that was sitting next to me. He was about your age, and just chatting. And so, like, well, what are you doing? And of course, they just think I'm going to visit my grandkids. They never think I'm going to do. It's so funny.
Yeah,
well, actually, you really want to know what I'm doing. But I told him, kind of in very hushed tones, what I was going to be speaking on, and he just got very sullen, and he turned to me and he says, "Well, that happened to me when I was 13," and he was probably in his late 30s. He was a pilot, and he flew private jets, and he just turned to me. He says, "I'm still not over it."
Wow.
And the sadness, just the here's this guy that you would never think, but he's still carrying that around. And what if he had been given a warning? What if somebody had been able to better protect him? What would have been, the outcome? And so, again, we need to teach our children to, what porn is, why it's harmful, what to do when they see it, not only so that they don't become, trapped in an addiction, but also so that they have a better defense against, being, sexually harmed by others, or even sexually harming other children, right? We need to have that conversation as well. Yeah. And because you think it's bad your kid was harmed by a perpetrator, how about having the child that's the perpetrator? That is a nightmare. And depending on the state you live in, we have a bunch of articles on that. So if you know somebody in that situation, send them to Defend Young Minds. We have lots of help. My heart goes out to these parents. They didn't see it coming, and depending on where they live. So that's a whole other conversation, but it all is coming. So much of it is coming from porn.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And what's considered mainstream today is so much more violent and aggressive. All of the messages that we know are kind of demeaning that have been in pornography for a long time are at all-time highs right now. And so, yeah, for a young boy who's watching and whatever, doesn't know any better, or maybe he does know better, but he's getting an example, right, set before him. And unfortunately, in today's day and age, a lot more sexually open. He can be a few steps away from being able to replicate that himself, and often, causing a lot of harm in the process. And we're hearing lots of stories of this happening a lot more often now. So definitely a problem. I want to ask you about the future, Kristen. Like, is good robots, bad robots coming out, or is there something coming out to, that's, I guess, are you considering the technology developments and AI and some of those advancements? Is it shaping at all what you're dreaming about for what you're doing with Protect Young Minds, or Or do you feel like the main thing will continue to be the main thing? And obviously there's a lot of ancillary pieces to this, but I guess, what does the future
Yeah.
hold, and how do we get better at protecting kids?
Yeah, that's great, Sathiya. I think that's a great. Yeah, we just had another conference in DC in August and uh, talked to people about the sextortion and the bots and the, all that, and the suicide that's happening as a result of some of these kids getting sextorted and then feeling so ashamed that
Right.
they are, taking their lives, which is just terrible. Well, I'm writing a book for girls. So if you have daughters, this is the book. We're going to talk a little bit more about objectification. We're going to talk about, girls often get into porn through romance novels. They like the story. They like the relationship piece, right?
Hmm.
But they still end up, they often end up in, full on porn, but videos, but they often will go through erotic literature and they will go through hentai
Hmm.
porn, which is the
More
anime porn.
animated kind of forms. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So anime porn is hentai. And so they will do that because maybe it's not quite as real. So we're going to be tackling those things in an age appropriate way. To give girls a heads up because we are seeing more and more girls pulled into that, and even women, and it's just as addicting. So I'm writing that. Should be out this next summer. I'm not one of these people that writes a book in like 3 weeks. I just, you know, I think about it. I test it. I beta test. We just got a bunch of beta test results back. And so I'm starting to go through those. Um,
What do you look for in the beta test?
I ask a lot of questions about vocabulary, about like, was this clear? Was this analogy clear? Was, just asking parents, so they read it to their daughters or to their kids. And I did a lot of this for the first book. So I learned a lot. Like, you have got to test these things with your audience. Like if you think your brain is good enough, no, it's not. And I know my brain isn't good enough. So I need the brains of a lot of people to help me before I ever put a book out. Such a sensitive topic. But I think it is. I think the reason both books have been #1 bestsellers on Amazon and continue to be are, it's clear that there's been a lot of work and we've really fine-tuned it. But the future, we have talked about AI. We've written several articles about AI on Defend Young Minds. So if you're interested in that, you could go there and kind of how to talk to your kids about it and some standards. We also have some projects for teens. Now, I tend to be 3 to 13, but I always get asked for teens. What do you have for teens? And so we are starting to work on a resource that you could use with teens.
That is really, really good. I'm glad that you mentioned writing for women. We had Nick Stumbo from Pure Desire on very
Mm-hmm.
recently, and a lot of his data is a little bit more focused on what's going on in the local church. But I think it was 40%. 40% of women in the church were struggling and didn't really have anywhere to turn. So that's a number on the rise. And it's funny what you said, because the first person I ever heard say this about women watching porn was Jordan Peterson, saying that for
Mm-hmm.
them it's a lot more through literary measures. And I
Right.
I almost scoffed at it. I didn't really get it because I thought, who's reading books? Like I didn't really. I was just a bit naive, and it's been very interesting to have more conversations with women over the last probably year and a half, and whether it's women who are watching themselves or women who help women that are struggling, and just to see how true that is and how young of an age that exposure can happen, right? Because again,
Mm-hmm.
reading romance novels and stuff like that is part and parcel in those younger age groups. But just realizing how much, I guess, trouble it could lead to, especially without some good education. So that's amazing. I wanted to ask you something actually about good pictures, bad pictures, which is that a majority of the narrative is the mom informing the son. So obviously, it's more targeted towards boys because we know boys are the more popular consumer, more common consumer. Is there a reason that is it typically the mom that you find that's having these conversations more often? Mothers reaching out to you more. I'm just wondering if there was a reason for that. And second question would then be, I guess, what could fathers do to be more involved in the conversation if that is the case?
Well, we do bring in the dad at the end of the book,
Yes,
as
yes,
you
you did.
know.
Yes, yeah,
We did that very strategically. I do know a lot of mothers that because of pornography, they've been divorced, and so that's been very painful. And we wanted to kind of give them an option, right, with that
okay,
final chapter. However, we do find that women are definitely very interested in protecting their children from pornography. And we do find men, because I think it's becoming more and more common that men are, reaching out and looking at our materials and our, on our social media and the books and everything. I think that you mentioned earlier in this conversation the hesitancy, because if you're a man and you're struggling with it, how do you even want to? You just want to forget about it. You don't even want to think about your kids having this problem. You don't even want to go there.
yeah,
And you may not think that you're the right person to do it, but I think you're the perfect person to do it. And your kids do need, a father's voice, the mother's voice and the father's voice to talk to them about this. So, yeah, I do see some men being hesitant for the very reason that you brought up. But I say take courage, do the right thing, and prepare your children to reject pornography. You can do it. You can do it.
and it does make sense that like I feel like generally mothers are just on top of these things. They're thinking about the conversations. They have more conversations about what's going on at school and peer to peer. They're just a little bit more in the fold. So I think that does make sense. For the book that will be more geared towards girls, young girls, is that still going to be the perspective of the mom and the daughter? I mean, that would make sense to me based on what you've told me, but I'm just curious.
There's going to be a mother and a daughter, but the father's also going to be part of it.
Yeah, got it.
Fathers are so important to daughters. So
Yes.
important. So important. So I definitely am going to have the father in there, and I'm excited for this. I feel like that this has been needed, and people have been asking me to write this book for years. And, I'm just not, I just do the best I can, keeping everything going, but
Yeah.
it's coming, and I'm excited about it. And I know there are a lot of people waiting for it. So
Yeah.
that's
Good.
coming. We have a thing for teens, like I said. We have so many resources on defendyoungminds.com. So I invite all of your listeners to go to our website and check out everything that we have there, including a course called Brain Defense, digital safety. So it expands kind of the conversation. So it's not just about porn, but it's about other things and good tech habits, which we all need.
Yes.
We all need good tech habits. I was looking at this box that I bought where you can, I gotta reach it here, where you can put like your phone in the box,
Yes.
so if you're, so you can kind of like curtail.
Yep.
Yeah. I had to take YouTube off my phone. Like, no, I can't even it's just like, if my adult brain can be hacked, completely hacked by social media, by YouTube, by the algorithms,
Yeah.
I had to just admit it to myself. Like, they're good. They're better than me. Like, I can't, I have to control. Yeah. Once I go in, I feel like I need to tether myself
yeah.
Well, with a like an alarm or something, like to keep me from. And I have a fully developed brain, and I know the problems with this. So,
yeah.
In any case, but we do try to give parents some help with the porn problem. I know that your audience is a Christian audience, and people have often asked me, "Well, is your book a Christian book?" And I'm a Christian person, but I felt like most parents have lots of resources to talk to their kids about their beliefs,
Yeah.
right? But they don't have a lot of resources to talk to their kids about pornography. So you can overlay your own beliefs, with the information about addiction and pornography that we give in the books, and it'll even be stronger.
I agree with that. I think that was a really smart move on your part to really get the principles and the concepts there, and then you leave some room for parents to insert their beliefs, the nuances around it. I think that's really really smart. You mentioned so many resources, Chris, and obviously the two books. Is there one other thing that you'd say, like if you're going to start somewhere as a parent, here's the right place to get going? I want to make sure that we account for all the resources you mentioned, but anything in particular for a next step from this interview?
Yeah, I would say go to Defend Young Minds and download the How to Talk to Kids About Pornography free PDF. I was actually, we also have a bunch of other guides, like Is My Child Ready for a Smartphone? Building Emotional Resilience in Kids, How to Protect Kids from Sexual Abuse. But we have a lot of guides, but that one is free, How to Talk to Kids About Pornography. Then I would definitely, encourage people. Obviously, I wrote the book to help parents. So I would obviously, want them to give the book a look and see if it could help them.
Absolutely. We will put links to all that in the show notes. Kristen, thank you for the work you're doing, and thanks so much for taking some time to be with my audience today.
It was a pleasure, Sathiya. Thank you so much.